Hey, everybody. I am Ryan Belinak, the Director of Growth and Development at Keller Williams Downtown, and I am so excited to get to do an agent spotlight today with one of my dear friends, great agents, Ruben Mancha. I have to say, from the first time that I walked into Keller Williams, coming from another company, you were the first person to greet me with a warm handshake, a warm welcome, a great smile. And, you know, guys, his story also, once I got to know you, is just one of the most inspirational and impactful stories. So I am so thrilled to get to sit down with you. And I would like to introduce everybody to Ruben Mancha. And would you just like to tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely, Ryan. My name is Ruben Mancha-Bayona. I'm a proud agent of Keller Williams Realty Downtown, and I'm super excited to be here today.
Awesome. Awesome. So for those of you that don't know Ruben, I would love for you to just tell us a little bit, just a snippet, kind of a Cliff's Notes version of your background and how you got into real estate.
Yeah, absolutely. So in essence, right, I had graduated high school. My intention was to go to college. I had a life situation happen. My dad passed away. We inherited a ranch. It was my mom and I, and my mom went into depression. So in addition to being in depression, we were having a really hard time figuring that side of things. And ultimately, we threw in the towel, right? The cows, the ranch was out in Mexico. My mom was taking care of that. I was here working construction during the day, fast food at night, and I was given the opportunity of getting into real estate. I initially thought that real estate was somewhat like telemarketing, so I was going to be in a cubicle somewhere stuck. And I later learned that you could have a really big impact on your clients. So I got familiar with what that looked like. Then I was introduced to the fact that it was 100% commission. So then that was even more terrifying, right? But I remember I joined a team, and I remember telling my team lead, you know what, I think I'm going to wait until I'm 21 years old because nobody's going to take me serious at 19. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I could appreciate that, but one of two things can happen. You could either join right now, and by the time you're 21, you'll have 3 years of experience, or you could wait the next 3 years and you'll be a rookie on day one at 21 years old. So I took a leap of faith, and yeah, fast forward a couple more years, we're here.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I mean, you're not just here, but you've also built a team here, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So it's been a huge opportunity. I've always been of the belief, right, that thankfully when things start going well, now you're in a position to help others. And I think a lot of people, we have that in our hearts that we really want to help others, but it's hard to understand at the moment that first you need to help yourself so you can put yourself in a position to help others. And we're really, really grateful that the team slowly but surely has been growing. We've also said that we really want to focus on quality over quantity. So I think we've been very intentional of identifying what are those gaps that we need to fill and finding the right people for those spots.
Amazing. Amazing, Ruben. So I'm going to jump into a few questions that I prepared, and I'm actually going to read them so that I get them correct.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is one thing, Ruben, about your early journey that would surprise people who only know you as a successful real estate agent that you are?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most surprising things is that I actually lived in Mexico for 5 years. I think that's one of the biggest blessings in my life because I think it's allowed me the opportunity to truly appreciate the opportunities and everything that has come our way. And it by no means has been easy, but it's again made me or allowed me to be appreciative of everything that we have. So long story short, right, I was born and raised here in Denver. I lived here until the age of 9 and a half. We moved to Mexico, and I turned 10 years out there. As I mentioned, right, I did 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade. And believe it or not, by the age of 14, I asked my parents if I could move back and come here to the U.S. I was in middle school at the time, but unfortunately, right, the community where we lived in was a really small community. And the highest level of education for most people was going to be middle school. And once you were done with middle school, it was a little bit of a luxury if you wanted to go to high school. The biggest reason is because there was by no means a high school in our community and in the surrounding communities. So we had to go to the closest thing we had to a city, and you had to figure out a way to get there, eat there, uniforms, and the fees and the cost that went along with continuing that education. And I always loved school. I know a lot of people have a hard time with school. I always loved school. So I was very passionate and did want to pursue that. But once that was said and done, once you finished high school, which was, let's say, 20 to 30 minutes away, then we actually had to go to the city if we wanted to pursue college. And in my opinion, at the time, the problem wasn't that. The problem was that once we finished college, we weren't in the best state where we were going to find a lot of opportunities. So if we really wanted to pursue a career in whatever we studied, we'd have to look at one of the major cities in the nation. So it still meant leaving my hometown and leaving my parents. So I just felt like at the time there wasn't many opportunities. I asked them for a shot at you know, having that trust in me and allowing me to move thousands of miles and come back to the U.S. And to no surprise, they said no, right? They were under the impression that I wasn't ready, and I could agree, right? At the time, I felt like I was ready, and I was far from being ready. Unfortunately, while we were living in Mexico, the political climate was not the best, and my grandfather on my mom's side committed suicide. He was under a lot of stress. He was under just, you know, corruption was at an all-time high in our area, and he just couldn't take it anymore. And, you know, that was very unfortunate. So I think that allowed my parents to open their eyes and say, okay, unfortunately, you know, his possibilities are very, very limited. So I turned 15. We came to the agreement. You'll finish up middle school in Mexico, which ends at 9th grade, and we'll consider the possibility. So we called our family members. We had an auntie that I had grown very closely with her son, and she said, yep, I'll take him in. So sure enough, I got on a bus, came back to U.S., did sophomore year. Sophomore year was very enjoyable in my opinion. I started working shortly after that. There was an issue, right, with that auntie, and after that I lived with cousins, with other family members up until I was able to finish high school. And thankfully I had been approved to various colleges. I was very intentional going to CSU. And that summer, my dad passed away. So my dad passes away. It shakes things up. And I'd like to believe, because I don't want to get into a victim role where I just say that it was impossible. I'd like to believe that if I really, really, really wanted to go to college, I could have found out a way to make it happen. But at the time, I felt like I didn't want to let my dad down, because for retrospect, my dad, he came from a very, very poor childhood. He lost his dad when he was 7 years old and fought his way to have something. So when he passed away, I just felt that if I threw in the towel and we just sold everything, it was me giving up and me being on the weak side of things, where we just, you know, took a shortcut. So I was very intentional that, you know, far from surviving, we were going to thrive. And, you know, as a teenager at the time, there was a lot of things that I would, you know, not agree with my dad, and I felt like I knew better. So I thought, like, okay, this is my chance. You know, this is where we're going to take our ranch to the next level and make things work out. And we gave it a shot for about a year. We unfortunately couldn't make it work. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a gentleman by the name of Omar Hernandez who was introduced to my life, and he gave me that opportunity of joining real estate. First interaction we had, I again thought it was telemarketing, so I completely dismissed the idea. And later I had an occurrence. We were both leaving Mass. I saw a family walk up to him and tell him, you know, do you remember our kids? And I was very shook because they kind of idolized him. And I'm like, you know, like, what'd you do for them? And he said, I sold them their house. I helped them get into a house. And I told him, I'm like, but that's your job. And he's like, yeah, that's the beautiful side of it, that people are very appreciative of what it is that we do. So I gave it some thought. I just started taking my real estate course, and by that time we were still fighting with the idea of making things happen. I was working construction during the day, fast food at night, and I had saved up enough money to where my goal was to go back to Mexico for a full month, get everything straightened out, and then come back. And they rescheduled my test. So they pushed out my test, but they pushed it out to the time frame that I was going to be in Mexico. So I just said, okay, it'll give me a month to study. I'll study as much as I can, and I'll come back. And I go to Mexico. I didn't study for a single day because I had other stuff that I was dealing with. I came back, and I remember getting an email reminder that my test was coming up. And I was like, dang, what do I do? Because I hadn't studied. So my first instinct was to reschedule, but you had to pay to reschedule this time around. So I was like, I don't think I can afford it, and I'll just use it as practice. If I fail it, I'll know why I failed, and we'll go from there. And I remember I walked in. The receptionist was super, super kind. She walked me to a computer. I passed it, and I remember seeing that I passed it. And I walked out, and I was a little shook. I was like, I don't want to jinx it. So I was very, very quiet when I walked out. And she said, honey, don't worry. It's very rare to see someone pass it on the first try. And she's doing a couple clicking, and then she says, wait, you passed. I'm like, I thought so. I just didn't want to jinx it. So little did I know, right, that for what it's worth means almost nothing, right? Because then you actually have to learn your whole career from there. But it's been very, very pleasant. I got licensed in 2019. I was under the impression that the minute that I post on Facebook that I'm a real estate agent, everybody's going to message me, and it was far from that. So I went through my savings, had to get a job, and I was committed to going back to construction. My team lead sat me down, said, listen, Ruben, you want to be in an industry where at least you're somewhat dressed up so that if you have to meet a client, you don't have to go home, shower, and figure things out. So we agreed on a bank, and I worked for First Bank for some time. I saved up as much money as I could, and I quit First Bank the last day of February. So my first day in real estate was March 2nd, if I'm not mistaken, of 2020, because that was the first Monday.
Oh, great time. Huh?
Great timing, yeah. So fast forward a couple weeks, COVID became a thing. And at the bank, they were getting paid 1 week on, 1 week off, getting paid for both because I stayed in touch with my old coworkers. And meanwhile, I was over here making 100% commission. And there was a period where we didn't know if we were essential or not. So I was freaking out, to say the least. And I remember our office was having morning calls to make sure everybody was in a positive mindset. And I remember being told that there's people that have it worse than you. So if you're going through a rough time, unfortunately, there's people that are going through even harder time. So if you're in a position to help them, try to help them. And I didn't know at the time what that looked like. Eventually, it kind of looked into, helping them take groceries or, just being someone they could talk to. So I was very, very intentional of trying to reach out to as many people as I can and saying, and if there's any way I could help, I'm here to help. And I did 9 deals my first year. I had a deal rollover, so it would have been 10. And that tied me for second place on the team.
Amazing.
So that tied me for second place on the team. And thankfully, ever since then, thereafter, I was in first place on that team. Up until 2023, that team decided to pursue a new company that was starting. And I decided to stay with Keller Williams. And as mentioned, that's allowed the opportunity of having people join the team that I'm very appreciative of, and I'm very thankful. And it's all been with the intention of delivering the best experience to our clients. Something that I'm very passionate about is that my mom's still in Mexico, so I want to be as intentional as I can of spending time with her because I had a little under 18 years with my dad, and it flew by. And I realized that most of the time that I had with my dad, I was never really present because I was always either trying to prove him wrong or trying to make him proud of me. So I never really had the opportunity of being present and enjoying my dad. So now I've done the best of my ability to be very present with my mom and enjoy her when I'm out there. And I don't think that should come at the sacrifice of our clients. So that's why the way we've designed our team is a little outside of the normal, but it's been with that intention of just making sure that our clients are taken care of in the event that I'm a couple thousand miles away.
Yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
Tenacious. Tenacity. I just keep coming back to that word with you because so many of those roadblocks that you hit would have stopped so many people, not just in real estate, but just in life. And so the fact that you just kept pushing through, you kept shooting for your goals, Ruben, I mean, it's just amazing. And I will say that your dad is proud of you.
I appreciate that.
Very much so. All right, next question. When things get incredibly tough or stressful, as they always do in our industry, of course, what is the internal self-talk or belief that keeps you moving forward when others might quit?
Yeah, so I believe that as humans, we're either running away from something or we're running towards something. And there's no right or wrong. I just have learned to, by experience, right, that one's more pleasant than the other. And the example that I give is that, for instance, right, when I graduated high school, my dad passes away. I was running away from all of that. I was running away from being in a position where it's always stressful when you have to look at your bank account before you tap your card because you don't know if it's going to go through. So that was exactly what I was running away from. And as harsh as it might seem, I think at that time, yes, I had dreams. Yes, I had goals. Yes, I had aspirations. But in all reality, I was nowhere near achieving them because at the time I was just trying to get as far away as I possibly could from that. And, through the years, through the months, thankfully we were able to create some gap from that lifestyle that we didn't want to live to not being exactly where we want, but at least now we're in a position to say, okay, I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now I'm heading in that direction. And I think that, right, just being very transparent with yourself and saying, okay, if I'm not in a position where I want to be, I want to get out of here as soon as possible. There's a saying, right, if you're going through hell, don't stop. Just, go even faster. And if you're in a really, really good position, then, let's be very intentional where it is that you want to get to, so that when you have those bumps in the road, you're crystal clear as to why you're taking that next step forward.
Awesome. Awesome, my friend. If you could implement one habit or mindset into every new agent joining our office today, what would that be?
There's a lot that goes into the industry. I think that it's split into three components. You have to find the business, you have to service the business, and then you have to run the business. And I think the biggest thing, and it's probably been always, right, not just right now, is the ability of being coachable and understanding that there's been people before you, there's going to be people after you. And I don't think any of us ever get to the point where we know it all. I think, either markets change or we change or times change, and there's always a constant evolution, and we always need to be on our toes and not take for granted that, my previous success is going to guarantee future success. So that ability of being coachable and being willing to learn and adapt so your business doesn't struggle.
It always shocks me because I think one of the things about our industry is that it does change so much.
Yeah.
We're always pivoting. We're always on our toes. And I think for a number of people, they want more stability in their industry, but that's actually one of the things that I think for myself, probably for you, we love most about real estate, and having a healthy dose of humility is always important.
When I started, I remember, and it probably happens to every new agent, right? I think our biggest insecurity is if they're going to ask, how long have you been in the industry? And I remember always seeing as an obstacle that there was other agents that could brag and say, I've been in the industry 20, 25, 30 years, 40 years, right? And I think the last couple of years have made all of us very, very humble, because I think the last couple of years have demonstrated that, unfortunately, that previous success does not guarantee success in this market. And unfortunately, some of the agents with those track records are struggling the most right now, because whatever worked back then is not working right now. And for instance, we had a class yesterday with Dave, who's a good friend, and it amazed me because, I thought to myself, I'm like, he's found tremendous success in what he's doing in, let's call it, a short time frame, right? Because he said he became very intentional of his social media, I believe, like 2 years ago. So how do you show that, or how do you teach that to someone who the first thing they'll say is, nope, I already know it, like I've already been in the industry, when in reality, social media was not part of the industry 30 years ago, right? So on the contrary, that ability of constantly learning and constantly adapting and being willing to, learn from others, maybe even if they've been in the industry less time than you. So, yeah.
It's a really interesting thing, because I think a lot of people, a lot of agents that got into the market around like 2015, 2016, when the market was just cranking, have left the market,
right? Because
they didn't implement the systems and the processes that would create, a sustainable lead pool. You name it. They just didn't have good habits. And so when the market turned, all of a sudden it kind of exposed their weaknesses.
There's I'm really passionate about stats, and when we look at the number of sales in the U.S., after the market recovered in 2012, if we round up 2013, we went from 4 million, which was the average, up to 5 million, and then our most recent peak was 2021, where we had 6.1 million, and then sales came down to 5, then 4.1. And I point that out to clients, and I make that joke, right? I'm like, during this period, that's when everybody got their real estate license. And then when the market came down, that's when everybody had to go get a job. And they'll chuckle, but unfortunately, sadly, right, we know a lot of agents that, sure enough, market was booming, they got their real estate license, things got a little challenging, and they had to leave the industry.
Yep. All right, my friend, if you look at the landscape of our industry right now, what is the number one skill an agent needs to master to stay ahead of the curve?
I think especially now that most of our clients have access to the information through AI, through whatever search engine we want to throw out there, I think it's very, very important that we truly understand our industry and understand what's going on. And what I mean by that is that I think it's going to become more and more common that clients are going to challenge the agent if they truly don't feel like the agent knows what they're talking about. And I don't think it's either good nor bad. I just think that if we look at how real estate has changed, we're not just going in that direction, we're already there. And what I mean by that is, for instance, like let's talk about the having access to houses, right? Previously, when they were in a book, you would call and you'd say, hey, what do you have that's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath? Nowadays, someone won't call you and say, what do you have that's a 3-bed, 2-bath? They already went online and said, I already found these. So if their perception was that you were going to find the houses, they already beat you to it, right? Back in the day, or, you know, a couple years ago, a client might ask you, well, you know, this is my situation. What do you think is the best loan program I should go with? And nowadays, they've probably already done their research, and it might or might not be a good option, but they'll probably say, well, I want this type of product. And there's no right or wrong, but that's where I think truly being an expert in your area and truly being able to understand what's best for them is going to set agents apart. So there's a saying that says something along the lines of, you know, a lack of confidence comes from a lack of competence. So I think now more than ever, it's really, really important for agents to understand, okay, what are the components of the business and how can I learn it to the best of my ability without crossing any lines? And what I mean by that is, for instance, right, let's talk about loan products. If you're not a lender, have a really, really good lender in your corner that you could quickly refer them to. So now you're not giving loan advice unnecessarily, right? But at bare minimum, knowing the basics of what goes into loans and what does that world look like. So I'd say that. I say, you know, just being willing to truly, truly learn. As I mentioned, I'm a huge fan of stats. And anytime I meat with clients, I ask them, like, did you appreciate knowing what's going on in the world? For the most part, they'll say yes. There are some clients that say, well, it was a little overwhelming, right? But I always say, you know, I'd rather you know it than for you to feel like you didn't know it throughout the process. And I think if you were to ask any agent walking across the street, you know, instead of getting a personal opinion as to what they perceive as the market, making sure that they're fully informed of, okay, this is what's going on, this is why it's going on, and more than likely this is what we can anticipate based on the information, right? Not a personal opinion, based on the information. We had a discussion as an office yesterday, the importance of knowing your contracts, because now by knowing your contracts, you can anticipate how a solution has to be met, right? So yeah, I mean, just truly seeing this industry as something you're going to build a career off of and giving it that respect and that importance that it deserves.
Competency.
Right.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it does seem, you know, over the past few years especially, like the level of competency sometimes just isn't always there out in the industry. And I think it's so important because, again, you're helping guide somebody not just through the biggest transaction of their lives, but through something that has legal consequences and implications as well.
Yeah, I remember something I'm super grateful, and I'll give a shout out to my old team lead, Omar Hernandez. He'd have us learn the contracts to start with, right? And a lot of agents will ask me, well, how did he do that? You'd literally sit down and read it, and you'd have a highlighter and you'd take notes, right? Like, okay, what am I interpreting with what I'm reading to get familiar with what is in the contract? And then he'd have us sit down and say, okay, let's go through it together, right? What do you interpret of section 1, section 2, section 3? So you could kind of like now start explaining it to him. So by the time you met with the client, you weren't scared of them saying, well, what does that mean? Because you had been practicing it, so you were in a better position. So yeah, I think all those little things, right, of just making sure we're taking the time and pouring back to the profession that we chose.
I've said for a long time, Ruben, I think that the sexiest agents in our industry are the smartest ones. Not always the ones that are, you know, on Instagram and doing whatever else, but it's truly the people that know the contract, that know the industry. Sexiest agents are the smartest.
I agree.
All right, my friend. Last question that I have for you. Knowing everything that you know now, if you could go back in time and sit down with a rookie Ruben Mancha on his very first day, what is the best piece of advice you'd give him?
Best piece of advice I'd give rookie Ruben would be, don't wait to be successful for everybody to know you're in real estate. Let everybody know that you're in real estate, and then you'll achieve success. And as I mentioned, right, that lack of confidence comes from a lack of competence. So it's impossible that on day one you memorize your contracts, you know the market in and out, you have the best presentation. It's going to take some time. But the next best thing you can do is that as you're developing those skills, you're partnering with the right people that will help you get there sooner, right? We mentioned having the right people in your corner, the right office, the right leadership, the right supervision, your partners, right? Your lender, your inspector, and making sure you're putting yourself in a position to succeed. So, again, it's inevitable, right? We've all had that day one. We've all had that first week, that first month, that first year, and making sure that, and even enjoying that part of it, right? I look back and I remember saying, like, for instance, like documenting what our day-to-day looks like. I remember thinking or looking at like Ryan Serhant on $1 Million Listing New York and saying, well, I'm going to wait until I get there. And then you read Ryan's book and it's like he was nowhere near being there, but he knew he wanted to get there. So he started doing everything in his ability to get there, right? So early on in my career, it would have been amazing, right, of saying, you know, I know my friend Tulio Pena still does it. He'll do a quick Facebook Live and say, hey, guys, I have this new listing. As I promised to my seller, I'm door knocking the entire neighborhood. Join me as I do this. And at the end, I'll give you a quick update as how things went. So enjoying that learning curve, right, and being very, very intentional. And I think people also want to see that side of agents, that they're putting in the work, they're being very intentional, and it'll lead into having that trust, right? And I think that self-belief too, of knowing like, okay, I'm putting in all the work, it's going to pay off. So again, in a nutshell, not being the secret agent and letting the world know that we've chosen this profession and we're giving it everything we got.
Yeah. Wow, Ruben. I mean, you are such an example of mindset in this industry. I mean, it blows me away. And I have to thank you, not just obviously for your time today and for the ability to get your story out so everybody knows who you are. But I also have to say, as you know, somebody that really is so proud of this office, I am so honored to have agents like you representing Keller Williams Downtown.
I really appreciate it, Ryan.
I appreciate it.